a good number of people have been talking a lot about consciousness and how are we to understand consciousness? Is consciousness related to feeling? Is it related to awareness? Is it localizable to brain states? What part of the brain? How is it distributed in nature? I mean, there's a whole range of questions, issues have been talked about. What I would want to do here, I'm going to see how quickly I can do it, is to talk about what I see to be an, a main strategy that's used, and I want to talk about the virtues of it, but one of the real problems is reductionism. That so many of the accounts that I hear are highly reductionist. And when I say reductionist, it's really on two fronts. On one front, it's people who want to say that consciousness is somehow reducible to the location of kinds of brain states, and you're going to try to locate consciousness even if not a thing inside the brain. They're going to diffusely locate it within inside the head across firing patterns across regions of the brains and things like this. And the reductionism there is the eclipse of understanding communication technologies in the way that the larger environment is actually registering its impact by way of the brain, and the brain is in a kind of symbiotic relationship with the both the natural environment as it's registered through the kinds of sense capacities we have, but also through those senses that have now been amplified, extended, and altered through communication technologies. So the communication technologies are not only the environment that we're in, which is now shaping the brain in certain ways, but they're extending and amplifying the senses themselves, which it's sort of cutting in both directions. And so there are very powerful ways that the environment itself is impacting brain development and hence consciousness. And so I think it's very difficult to reductively locate consciousness, quotes, in the brain if we're going to really understand it, how it is, how it's evolving, how it's developing. Okay, the other related reductionism, and this is one that's more pernicious because it has, I think, a lot of, as the other one, it has a lot of use value, but this one really becomes problematic when taken too far. I think the one on brain states is largely, it's part of artificial intelligence. It's people trying to understand it enough to replicate it. I mean, the orientation is to replicate it, rather, it seems like it's to be able to replicate it, to produce it, and we'll imagine that we understand it when we can reproduce something that we're going to call enough similar to it. Okay, but I think that this issue here of what's the second front of reductionism? Well, the second front is the way that we want to trace consciousness back to its simpler forms. And this can be very powerful, very useful. I don't want to deny it. And I'm not suggesting that tracing our experience of consciousness back through the you know history and phylogenetic development that we can see across nature. Is there some merit to trying to go back and understand conscious forms that preceded human self-conscious awareness? I think there is, and I think we can learn a lot about ourselves by trying to study the grounding of consciousness. I mean, not only in an ontogeny of trying to understand the evolution and development of consciousness from early natal states through early adolescence and adulthood, and then what it means to be an adult, have adult consciousness, if you can differentiate adult consciousness from childhood consciousness. And I think those are very interesting. But I think that the issue that I would want to do here is to first to grant that, yeah, it is important to recognize evolutionary biology, and to recognize that human consciousness did not occur in a vacuum by way of a fiat from on high. No, a consciousness emerged from earlier lower forms. The problem of the reductionism is, to what extent do little differences of degree eventually make a difference, where now we're ending up missing the ground, or I'm sorry, we're now missing the phenomena that we have because we're understanding it in terms of what came prior, but what came prior is only partly, and it paved the way for what we experience now, but it doesn't give us the essence of it. See, I think there is a kind of essentialism that lurks in reductionism, especially as people try to trace it back to origins. So they're going to go, look, if you can show that humans basically emerged from a kind of algae, or they have these really lowly origins in slime, then all subsequent motivations, all subsequent conscious experiences are reducible to those earlier forms. I mean, sort of like you look toward what's common in DNA structure and you say, well, that's the essence of it. Well, that is very helpful. I don't think anyone wants to deny it. The problem is, doesn't it become reductive? Doesn't it become essentializing? And doesn't it, you end up using the earlier forms to imagine that you're understanding the later or subsequent forms, but what you're really doing is you're reducing the subsequent forms to the earlier ones. And I also want to see if I can talk about that a little bit more, and I'm going to, I guess, develop this as a, somewhat schmaltzy, I guess, an attempt to initiate a larger discussion about what is love. And I think love is something that really needs to be talked about, because feeling and consciousness are a common phenomenon that I don't think that we can have what we call consciousness without it being grounded in feeling. Now, if there is something there that we want to say is consciousness without feeling, and we're thinking artificial intelligence in forms of calculation and mathematical computation, and I guess algorithms that allow robotic movement. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we could talk about, but that's not, I don't think that's what we mean by consciousness. Now, if we try to do some of the reductive stuff, let's see if we can go back to there and trace some of the origins, because that is useful, but then see if we can't get to some of the limitations of it. Okay, so I would postulate, and I don't think these are controversial. I think this is my sense of what the contemporary worldview is. I mean, roughly. Okay, we're doing thumbnail sketch here and quick videos, but I think if you go to the simple, and again, simple for lack of a better word, the paramecium, the single cell organism, the cell wall or the membrane that differentiates inward and outward may be a kind of feeling of irritability and stasis that is its own awareness, where consciousness and irritability are somewhat in the same vein, or we can't really separate out the feeling of irritability, which is, I guess, an awareness of environment with evaluative load, with consciousness. Slowly, as neural complexity builds up, you get levels and layers where instead of just simple irritability or stasis to environment, you get, again, these kind of, I guess, multicellular organisms where, and again, some of this will get very difficult. That I think we want to say that feelings as we understand them come with limbic systems and with mammals, and there are brain structures for emotions, but there does seem to be a kind of awareness that is part of consciousness in animals that don't really have a ground in feeling. So some of it gets really tricky. Now, is there, so yeah, guys, I use the word consciousness. I can see this is already going to get very difficult. Okay, so you have cell irritability. It grows into levels of awareness. I'll just use, for simplicity, we'll call it cell irritability, which is a kind of an awareness. It's not yet consciousness, but it's the beginning of that process of valuative load toward environment. Then it moves into a kind of an awareness, where to move and to feel. See, I mean, I think there's interesting work in phenomenology on movement itself has a kind of feeling in it. Now, I don't mean emotions as we understand them in mammals and limbic systems and all this kind of stuff, but there does seem to be, in organisms that have the capacity to move, some kind of register of that movement, register of constraint of it, and a an evaluative horizon that's within it. It's not feeling per se, but it's as if the feeling is there, and the feeling is slowly giving birth to greater and greater degrees of what we're going to call ultimately consciousness. So the first feeling is a kind of irritability. Then there's this feeling of movement, I guess, of even the phototropism of plants. I think we want to be very clear that this is not a conscious activity. It's not merely chemical bonding like uh, I guess water, or the way water gains alignments in right angles when it turns to a solid. It's not that kind of system, but there is at least a kind of an awareness of phototropic um, mechanistic systems, if that's what we want to call them, but they do have some sort of register of preferable environments and what's not preferable. I mean, you can see different species of fruit-bearing vines vie with each other for their environment, especially if you go to complex environments. Plants they have a rudimentary kind of awareness of what's going on around them to deal with their environment, what's immediately approximately around there. I mean, trees communicate. Again, it gets very complicated. Communicate semiotic systems across, sometimes called zoosemiotics, across organisms. I mean, I do think some of that gets complicated. At the very least, I think by the time you do get to mammals, higher mammals, primates, you have consciousness. You have some sort of conscious awareness. That is, you have sensory systems that deal with distance, that have appetites, motility, they have desires, they can flee predators, they can have appetites. All of these feelings of appetite and of desire and of satiation and of tiredness and of feeling refreshed, these sort of ground level experiences give rise to consciousness. But at each subsequent level, you're getting new dynamics. You can't reduce it all just to irritability. Okay, by the time you get to humanity and human self consciousness as it comes to bloom through language, that the human organism has a kind of consciousness of a highly sophisticated, highly brainy primate, but without falling into the culture of a people, without falling into society. I'm not sure the degree to which consciousness would become self-reflexive and an I would emerge, and even there, I mean, there are debates about the degree to which people experience themselves consciously, reflexively in their own culture. I mean, it comes in degrees. It has to do with whether or not people are literate, how reflective are they of their emotions or not. Um, and it would seem to be that language introduces a kind of self-reflexivity that then complexifies emotions. That is, we can feel happiness and guilt at the exact same moment. I mean, we can be happy with something and then feel guilt over it. Guilt, remorse, complex ambivalent feelings. These are registers not just of an affect of the environment, but they're registers of our own contemplation of ourselves vis-a-vis those environments, right? They have a sort of meta representation embedded within the emotion. I think the thing that I'm wanting to stress here is that it would seem that love is, I don't want to call it uniquely human, but and I don't mean romantic love. I'm not talking about schmaltzy, falling in love with somebody and lustful feelings and all this kind of stuff. I'm talking about group love, family love, love of, and some of it can be very ugly. So love of one's nation, love of one's people. I mean, some of it has a real grim underside, but people can have heartfelt feelings for what doesn't love them back. I mean, people can love their animals. Now, do their dogs love them back? Well, some people are going to say yes, some people are going to say no. I guess I'm going to say the jury's out. I want to say I don't think the dog is able to love me like I can love the dog. But it doesn't matter. I think it's better to love than to be loved. And we can see this in so many ways, that part of human self-consciousness is a capacity to love the stranger, to love the environment, to love what will transcend you. And it seems as if this is one of nature's evolutionary gifts, one of burdens. I mean, we could throw different words around at it, but let's throw the burden at it for a second. I mean, I think other animals, I don't think they take hostages. I mean, isn't it interesting that we can so agonize in our love for others that we're more victimized when someone takes hostage what we love than when they take us. I mean, I think many of us, if we have family members, loved ones, children, there's so many people who, if another would take them and hold them hostage, it would drive us crazy and it would give us great pain and suffering. And we would suffer stress, mental anguish for another. And in a way that for ourselves, we could say, look, I can bear it. Other people don't worry about me. And then they still worry about us. I mean, we end up with our ability to love worrying about future generations, the entire world. And so it seems, I guess, as if even though human consciousness is grounded in feelings and in valuative assessments of the environment, if we try to reductively trace those down to nothing more than the brain state or nothing more than the origins that they had, we miss the kind of dynamics that have evolved and developed. I think, and this is why sometimes, I guess, when you remove all the dogma and you get rid of all of the windy poops and fairy dust, you get rid of all of the divine intervention and virgin births and burning bushes and promises about afterlives and all that kind of stuff, and if you move towards something like God is love, and what do we mean by love? What ought we mean by love? And is it possible to recognize the degree to which love challenges reductive self-interest theory? That is, I think the more that we understand the way that love evolved in history, the more that we can challenge, I guess, again, some of this reductionism. Maybe I'll say one last thing here, and this is, on the antinatalism stuff, that to me, the antinatalism stuff is just simply too reductive. It's way too reductive, and it misses one main point, and this is one of the most significant points, is that nature itself, nature evolved an organism that was able to take its own reproductivity under conscious awareness and ultimately under conscious control. I mean, the fact that the human organism, which cares so much about its offspring and is willing to sacrifice so much for the next generation, this organism has learned how, and it's through technologies, through birth control, all kinds of birth control technologies, not only in the ancient world, but the very modern, the pill, vasectomies, again, other techniques that people have now, not just rhythm, method, and awareness. These processes are already, I think, achieving what the antinatalists should be after, which is, I guess, loving humanity as a whole enough to be really concerned about the quality of life for everyone. And the more that people see that it's love that's in the backdrop of it, maybe we could get to the argument that isn't so reductive. And it's about how is consciousness somehow evolving, and it's grounded in feelings, but those feelings aren't simply base. They're feelings that themselves are part of a more and more complex brain that dialectically, through history and through forms of relation, I guess, has liberated people out of simple selfish desires. Okay, at least to some extent. Okay, thanks.